save our country is if we choose to love our kids more than we hate each other.
Hi, I'm Tony Lyons, president of Maha Action, and welcome to the Maha Revolution and the Media Hub. And what we saw today in congressional hearings was an attempt by Big Pharma to kind of take down Bobby Kennedy. Turned out to be a nothing burger. You know, people are not easily fooled. And but these are big companies with multi-billion-dollar revenue streams, and we all know that they're not going to go down easily. And so part of the reason that we all meet is to push back and to, you know, recognize that all the major newspapers, that so many of the TV shows, that they're all just set up to defend big pharma, big ag, big food, and that we have a responsibility to fight back and to get to millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in this country, and make sure that they know what's really going on, to bring them the truth through all the lies, all the propaganda, all the hit pieces, and to even let them know that, you know, when people go after, you know, Dr. Robert Malone or Gary Brecka or Bobby or Mary or, you know, in the last week or so, Stephanie, that's just how this game is played. That it doesn't mean that there's anything to the allegations that they bring, that these are just people who are warriors, that we're all warriors and we're fighting back against just an incredibly powerful group of people. So I'm really pleased to have all these great people on our panel tonight. And let's see if, so the first person we were going to have was Dr. Oz, and I believe he is ready now. So welcome, Dr. Oz. So you missed the opening, and we're all ready to hear your wisdom about what happened today.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not going to comment on today too much because I'm in Atlanta.
Oh, right.
Yeah, doing quite a bit of work, trying to pull together some of the pieces of the Rural Healthcare Transformation Fund. If it's okay with you, can I discuss that with the team?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So as part of the president and Congress's efforts to try to fix what was done during COVID, which included changing some of the basic structure of healthcare delivery in this country, as you all have been talking about it did involve everything ranging from vaccines to mandates to closures, but it also affected how we compensated the healthcare system, especially in Medicaid. And there were kickers put in place to increase funding because they wanted to make sure that in a time of war, effectively against this virus, everybody had enough money to continue to fight. Hospitals and other systems were well compensated. And as a result, over the last 5 years, the amount of money that we've spent on Medicaid went up 50%, 50%. That's not sustainable. You know, you basically become a big healthcare system with a small country attached. And so in an effort to address that, we said, let's go back to the way the system was working before COVID to peacetime, because we're in peacetime now. And so with that as a thought process, the bill sought to slow the growth of Medicaid. We're still investing $200 billion more in the Medicaid over the next decade than we had before, but it's not what it would have been. It's trillions of dollars more. And so that was a good thing in many ways, but one of the side benefits was it freed up some money, $50 billion, for us to put into rural healthcare. And I'm going to point out that as bad as we think traditional American healthcare has delivered wellness, in light of the fact that our life expectancy has dropped behind Europe by about 5 years now, that used to be equal to that of Europe when I was in medical school, which wasn't that long ago. But in the rural healthcare, it's 3 years behind urban healthcare, so we're even further behind, and so it's caused a series of consequences that have resulted in an elevation in chronic diseases, all the ones we always talk about, diabetes, high blood pressure, things that the Maha movement seeks to address by improving lifestyle and making it easy to be healthier, easier anyway to be healthier in America. And so in its wisdom, government said, okay, you know what, they got a problem. One way to do this is to slowly, put a Band-Aid on the hemorrhaging artery. Another way is just take a big swing, give a ton of money into the system, 50% more money into rural healthcare for Medicaid than before. over 5 years. So every year, 50% more than you had ever put into it, and then use that money wisely to catalyze change. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what catalyzing change really means. And it's defined in my mind, and it was in statute and the law as well, in very concrete ways. For example, we need workforce development. We have got to be able to get more nurses and doctors into rural America. You can't force people there. You can pay loans off, but people then go there for 3 years and leave. A better way of doing it, we think, might be to train people in these areas. Like, for example, LPNs at community hospitals, they tend to stay local, which is important because if nurses are in a community, they provide health advice all the time. We all know it, right? If you got a question, you ask a nurse or a doctor. And so having health professionals in small communities is a wonderful tool. They become detectives and coaches. They can get other people interested in healthcare. The other thing about LPNs is we can train a lot of LPNs in these community colleges, and there's a lot of interest from governors to do this. In fact, when nursing homes have to pay civil monetary penalties for making mistakes, that money has to go, the penalty has to go back into the nursing home system to make them better. Well, the best thing to do for a nursing home is hire more nurses, but you can't do that if you don't have enough nurses. So part of what we're doing is taking a lot of money, matching it to states, and then pushing hard to get more folks trained. The other thing we want to do is get people to work at the height of their licensure. By that, I mean, if you're a pharmacist, you did not go to pharmacy school to dispense pills all day long. You have the ability to do more sophisticated work. We'd like you to do that. And so by allowing pharmacists to do more, we now turn pharmacies into healing locations. That's important because we have 5,500 hospitals, but 85,000 pharmacies, pharmacies rather. So 17 times more pharmacies than hospitals, which means even in rural parts of the country, you have pharmacies that are available to us and pharmacies that we could use to provide urgent care. For example, mom, sees her child's got a sore throat. It's 9 o'clock at night. Does she drive across state to get to an ER to get taken care of all night long? Or does she go to the local pharmacy down the street, get a strep test, have a doctor review the result with the pharmacist, prescribe penicillin, which is at the pharmacy, and go back home and go to sleep with the baby and go to work the next day because they weren't up all night long. And that's cheaper for me, for CMS, because I've got to pay the bills for Medicare and Medicaid. So that's the kind of opportunity we're looking at. Another good example is the technological transfer. Can we get the same kinds of technological advances with information that are available at the big urban hospitals to also be present in rural hospitals? Better electronic medical record systems, better tools to help manage patients who've got cancer. I was just at Emory, which is a great hospital in Atlanta. My dad actually trained at Emory for a couple of years, so I know them. And that system has an incredibly sophisticated cancer treatment. They treat 1/3 of all the cancer patients in Georgia, but they now have the ability to go and into rural areas and help rural hospitals manage cancer patients better. So maybe you go to Atlanta for the big diagnosis, but once the care plan's in place, you don't want to drive 4 hours across state to get care. Stay local, let the local hospital stay solvent, let them improve their quality, and have the big hospital coach them, nurture them through the process. Those are the kinds of things you want to do. Now, there's a big vertical in MAHA. Part of what we want to do is to also focus on preventing disease. So this is how I think about it anyway. If we prevent disease, that's the best. If you already have a chronic issue like diabetes, and we can arrest it or reverse it, that's fantastic. That's sort of the second level. And then if we're not at either of those two locations, but you've got a more advanced disease, then MAHA can do other things that are actually also important, because even when you have cancer, it turns out that your bowel flora affect your survival. There are other things that are going on that we have always taken for granted that matter. By the way, what time of the day you give chemo matters. And all that sort of coalesces broader belief that you have more control over the process than you would ever have imagined. And once you realize that, you're in MAHA world. Because now not only are you the world expert in your body, but you're empowered to take advantage of all the information you have because you literally have skin in the game. And a healthcare system that empowers patients and incentivizes providers to listen to patients is going to be better. To me, that's all part of MAHA. So again, it starts with the kinds of vegetables that you purchase and eat, as opposed to processed food and sugar-laden junk food. It moves through the realization that you have control over the chronic diseases that people have always told you have to be treated with medications because they've given up on the fact that patients could do it themselves. And even in more aggressive diseases, you still have tremendous control if you trust that there's things you can do with food, exercise, and the like. So that's high level feedback from where we are in Atlanta. Lots going on. I know in Washington, there were hearings. Tomorrow, ACIP meets here in Atlanta to go over vaccine issues for hepatitis B, COVID, and MMR. So a bunch of things that I think you guys will be talking about. So I wish you luck. Lots of love.
Yeah, so Callie Means is going to come on next, and Callie, want to wish you really the best. Congratulations. Callie just had a baby, and is only, I think, about a day and a half in. So thanks for taking time out to talk to all of us.
Thank you. It's what it's all about. It was a beautiful natural birth, and the baby's doing great. And spent a little time back at home and away from the swamp, which is really nice. So I've got a list here, and we're at about 200 days, and I just want to read what we've done or what's in flight. And I think I talk, and we all talk high level, but I think really internalizing this list, because the media is telling us that not a lot's getting done, and it's actually funny, they can't get their story straight. Sometimes it's that MAHA is ineffective, and sometimes it's that it's so powerful that it's disintegrating the entire U.S. healthcare system. So the media actually can't get the story straight. But let's just go through what's being done, what's being talked about, what Dr. Oz, Marty McCary, Jay Bhattacharya, Bobby Kennedy are pushing on every day. Because this list, this is my message. We in 200 days have executed the greatest reforms to our public health system in modern American history, and these are positive reforms. We have the dietary guidelines coming out this year. And for 30 years, since the food pyramid in 1992, we have been told to eat carbs. We have been told that sugar is a healthy part of a 2-year-old's diet. We have been told that really carbs, grains are at the base of the pyramid. It's demonized saturated fat, demonized meat, demonized protein. Because of the voter outcry and voter momentum for MAHA, we are going to have revolutionary dietary guidelines, which are going to have a big cultural impact. But very importantly, there's hundreds of billions of dollars of procurement that come from those guidelines in schools and military and government, wherever the government touches money. This is a very important accomplishment we should have our eyes on. For the first time in modern history, we are closing the GRAS loophole. And this is significant. This is kind of wonky. But until this year, we were not able to study the ingredients in our food. The FDA did not have a list of the chemicals and ingredients in our food. It was self-policing from the food industry. Closing the GRAS loophole on the left and the right was a generational accomplishment people have been talking about for decades. Nothing happened. We are now going to be able to study what's in our food. We are creating finally a definition for ultra-processed food, so we'll be able to talk about that and regulate that effectively. We are revolutionizing and pushing diagnostic and treatment for food allergies. There's going to be dramatic reform to infant formula standards. We are doing a major initiative on breastfeeding. I can tell that from experience. It's magical, it's beautiful, and a whole initiatives on maternal health, which is really problematic right now. We are improving food quality and serve to veterans. Secretary Kennedy's working with the VA, with the Department of Defense. We are going to improve our food for militaries. We are going to improve food in hospitals. There's initiatives underway there. We're going to limit direct marketing of food to children. They are eviscerating conflicts of interest. And I think this is huge, right? This is a long-term journey, but really going to the systemic reforms about the conflicts of interest at NIH, FDA, CMS, throughout the agency. There's so much at work there. Just going down the list here, vaccine injuries. I mean, we've seen this today. The administration is having a complex, nuanced conversation that the American people want to have about vaccine injuries. Now, the Democrats have a poll, and they try to obfuscate this debate and just say anti-vax, anti-vax, anti-vax. But when you get down to it, Secretary Kennedy, removed the COVID vaccine from the schedule. That's what Susan Monterez, who's a liar, who's an activist, who had an anti-Trump legal team on retainer from before she was even fired. She's saying that taking the COVID vax off the recommended schedule is an assault on science. That's something that's 90% of parents are already doing, and 85% of healthcare workers are already doing. So the CDC and Susan Monterez is going up against 90% of parents. Having a nuanced conversation about Hep B. We do have a communications battle where we are bringing science-based conversations forward, not seeing a 78 shot schedule as just something that can't be questioned, a catechism, but actually going in and actually conducting science. And the administration and Secretary Kennedy, I think it's very admirable. They are inviting a mature conversation. The media, the Democrats aren't taking up on that, but I think the American people are ready for that conversation. We need to support Bobby with that. Just a couple more here. Dr. Ross talked about the Rural Health Fund. This is transformational. It's $50 billion a year, $1 billion to each state. And this money isn't going to go to build beautiful new hospital wings, which every hospital feels like they need to build. This is going to go, and as Dr. Oz was saying, we're going to really think about how to use that money to actually promote health, to actually represent a transformation in root cause healthcare, not just sick care. Keep an eye on the Rural Health Fund. This is something that's really resonating in states, and I think is going to be very important for the midterms. Another thing that was signaled in the MAHA report that the team is working on is we're looking at quality standards and how healthcare is delivered, how success is measured at CMS. This is wonky, but really important. Right now, almost all healthcare measurements about whether, people get reimbursements, whether people are successful, it's about whether patients are taking the drugs. It's about whether they're going through the standard of care treatment. But as signaled in the MAHA strategy and what the department is looking on is how you actually tie measurements of success to patient health. That sounds obvious, but this is actually a radical concept. Lastly, I'll just say, and I'd take a look at the MAHA strategy, this idea that we're focusing the NIH to look at autism, which is going to be a very exciting report coming out, and the team's feeling really good about, to look at the root cause of disease, to look at nutrition, to study vaccine injury, to look at the gut microbiome, to look at the underlying factors of health. This is a radical change. Until this year, about 95% of NIH funding went to R&D for pharmaceutical products, really accepting that people were sick. So this is a transformational change of that $50 billion annual budget. And we also have a lot of initiatives such as improving direct-to-consumer sales of food, something Joel Salatin's being talked a lot about helping our farmers with soil health. I mean, this is a big deal. McDonald's just announced a $200 million investment into regenerative agriculture. These are incremental steps, but they're important steps. And the fact that the central agricultural theme from the administration is soil health, is helping on technology, is helping on innovative practices, is working with our regenerative advocates with large companies to incrementally improve. I do think this is very important. And there's a host of food deregulation, agriculture, innovation practices that are listed in the MAHA strategy that I think we can all be really excited about. And lastly, the direct-to-consumer farmer ad action. I think this is a little bit undercovered, but this is significant action. The former head of the FDA, David Kessler, said, that he was against this type of action when he was the FDA chief in the 1990s, but now it's needed. And this is the most dramatic action possibly that could be taken. We're closing this loophole in 1997 that allowed the risk to be put into a phone number or a website link. Before 1997, there really weren't pharmaceutical ads on TV because, you had to disclose the risks. That loophole led to the explosion of pharmaceutical ads, which the administration thinks is directly tied to our overprescription crisis. And we think that has really adulterated the doctor-patient relationship. So this is a patient safety issue. And we're going back to the pre-1997 status quo, which is very significant, and I think is going to have a massive impact on public health. So that's where we are. I just want to, I think it's worth reading down that list. There's a lot getting done, and we are in a battle right now. We are in a battle where we need to communicate these wins, keep public perception and support on our side, because this right now is an outside versus inside game. We have, I think, people's consciousness, we have people's support. And the more we can keep voter support and support for this movement, for this action, we are going to defeat what are clearly some very subversive and dark forces that are trying to tell the American people that these positive actions are a threat to public health. So thanks, everyone, and let's keep pushing.
Thanks so much, Callie. It is really fascinating that on the one hand, you have President Trump and Secretary Kennedy making the most progress in public health, the most positive change that we've seen in the last 50 years. And yet we have every major newspaper telling us that they're dangerous, that there are terrible things happened, that are going on, that there's this incredible threat to public health. So, that dissonance is the gap that we have to fill, that we have to have thousands of people, thousands of influencers going on, their platforms and telling everybody in this country that these great things, these historic things are happening every single day. So one of the people who's really been fighting for change in public health and biohacking, taking control of your own health is Dave Asprey, and we're very happy to have you on today.
It's an honor to be here. I used to weigh 300 pounds. By the time I was 23, I'd been diagnosed with arthritis and had 3 knee surgeries. I had Asperger's syndrome, ADHD, OCD, something called ODD, which comes with it, oppositional defiant disorder. I was on antibiotics for 15 years. Before I was 30, I had prediabetes, high risk of stroke, heart attack, and crippling chronic fatigue. And none of that was necessary. It's because I did what the government told me to do, because I believed in the food pyramid, because I did what the doctor said, and the doctor did what he was trained to do, which was give me drugs, not to look at root causes. And when out of desperation, I fired my doctor and I learned from leaders in the longevity field, magically, I lost 100 pounds. I actually reversed my Asperger's syndrome to the point that I don't meet the clinical definition for it. And after 25 years in that field, I started the biohacking movement. And the idea there is so in alignment with MAHA and what we all want. And it's changed the environment around you. That includes your family, your community, your soil, the air you breathe, all of it, and the environment inside of you. So that you have full control of your biology. That's it. We just want to feel good in our bodies. We just want our energy. We just want our brains to work so we can go about doing the things that make life good. And we can actually be kind to other people and we're not sick all the time. I spent $2.5 million fixing myself and then reversing my age. And I'm younger now and stronger now than I was 20 years ago. But not everyone has $2.5 million to do it. And frankly, I wasted most of that figuring out what works. And I know what happened and why it happened. And a big part of this is because the CDC and the FDA, they actually used to protect us. At least that was the goal. And regulatory capture happened, as Bobby Kennedy has just pointed out, and he's fixing it right now. And you go back to 2016, 57% of people would leave an FDA department and go right into the industries they're regulating. It's a revolving door. And we all know it. We didn't do anything about it until we had the guts to go in and clean house. And where I come from in Silicon Valley as a former computer hacker, if in that world, if the data lies, you're running critical systems, people die, sometimes lots of them. But in the world of health, if people die, they don't die for quite a while most of the time. And that creates a lot of profit. So the disincentives aren't there. And it shows. In 2022, the CDC withheld critical hospitalization data by age and race because they were afraid that people like you and me, we would misinterpret it. So what's going on? They're managing the narrative, not the numbers, not the science, not even publishing the numbers, because we're smart enough now. And our medical providers, our doctors are smart enough now, and they prevented us or our doctors from having truth because of a narrative. And that is not okay. And we're in a situation where our regulators are now fast tracking junk or just not regulating it at all. And look at something like the approval of OxyContin. There's a 5-sentence letter in 1995 that said it's not addictive. Yeah, just 500 million people died. 500,000 deaths as a result of that. This is not how science gets done. Science only gets done when the numbers are transparent, when they're open, and when we get to decide what health we want. And I talk about something called your health daddy. And your employer is not your health daddy. Your insurance company is not your health daddy. Your doctor's not your health daddy. Only you. You're the one in charge of your health. And in order to do that, you get to pick your team to support you. Your government doesn't get to pick your team. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights. You get to be in charge. And if you're tired, you're inflamed, you're foggy, you're overweight, all the stuff that was my life, you're living the failure of the Centers for Disease Control, because the only thing they've controlled is the speed of growth of disease. It has not gone down, it has not stayed flat. It has gone up and up and up, and it's unacceptable. If those were my employees, if those were my agency, I would have fired them a long time ago. In fact, I am firing them. They are no longer in charge of anything to do with my health. And when they try to do that, they don't have the right to do that. And I would encourage all of us to say, you don't get to regulate, you get to advise. If we made that choice, I wouldn't hire them to advise me, but they're free to advise anyone who is dumb enough to still listen. In the meantime, I can go straight to the data. We can all do this. We can go to PubMed, which is free. It's online. And we can actually talk to other parents, and we can talk to our care providers who see what works and see what doesn't work. And we can make our own decisions and share it with our community. This is the gift that happens when we form a community like MAHA. And the thing that is most vexing right now is liability shields, which are fundamentally an unfair tax on the American people. And it's a tax we pay with our health first, then we pay it with Medicare dollars, and we pay it with economic disruption from having a population where, 93% of people are metabolically unfit. And right now, as we're speaking, there are people voting to approve new liability shields to spray chemicals on the United States, on our farmland, on our soil, on our children, in our water, things that cause Parkinson's disease, like paraquat. And there is no way, if a company manufactures it and it's illegal in China to spray this on the soil, but they manufacture it there and they send it to the US, and our government prevents us from suing the company that made it, or from suing the farmers who sprayed it on the soil, that oversprayed onto our children and onto our elderly and caused disease, 2.5 times higher Parkinson's risk. There's no excuse for that. So liability shields need to end for all products now. You make something dangerous, your company may end as a result, and your shareholders should sue you, and they should take the jets away from the people in charge of it. If we would just fix that, our health as a nation would transform. So my call to action for you is to just understand that we don't need another directive. We don't need new taxation through liability shields. We just need a declaration of health independence. And it starts with MAHA. It starts with us. We are all in charge of our own health. And when you are healthier, something magic happens. It's that you become more kind. You will treat other humans with respect and decency. And you can listen to someone who disagrees with you, and you won't lose your mind, because you have enough energy to be the kind of human that you're capable of being, that you were created to be. But you will not be that if you've been sprayed with poison that causes cognitive dysfunction and makes you sick and desperate and anxious all the time, the way I used to be. So end the liability shield. Do not allow that stuff to be sprayed, and regulate the amount in our food. We might not be able to stop the EPA from spraying or from approving spray of something, but we can, through food regulation, block food that contains levels of glyphosate or paraquat or atrazine or any of the other things that we know are illegal in dozens of other countries, but not here. I think the US is worth it. I think that we are worth it. And this is the most important thing. And if I can just close in saying, screw carbon. It doesn't matter. It's a 60-year problem, and pesticides are a 20-year problem affecting fertility in our country and others, and affecting our very existence. We can't have enough babies to worry about carbon at the rate we're going right now. So focus on where the problem is. It's the chemicals. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. Yeah, we should all think about that. Paraquat made in China, can't be used by people in China. It's against the law there, but they can ship it into the United States. Then we've got a government that tells us, like you said, Dave, that OxyContin is safe, it's fine. Glyphosate's fine. So we've been lied to at just a historic level, and we just need to really fight back. And there are a lot of people on this call who are from the mainstream media. And I think that's a good thing, because I think it's good that they hear these things, and that they look at the fact that when people say that Bobby Kennedy, for example, is anti-science, what they mean is that he's anti-corrupt corporate funded science that's been poisoning the American public for decades. And that kind of science we should all be fighting. We should all be anti that kind of science. And somebody who's been fighting those kinds of battles with dozens and dozens of lawsuits, many of which are ongoing, and is also the president of the incredible Children's Health Defense, is Mary Holland. Thanks so much, Mary.
Tony, thanks so much. It's great to be here. So for the last, I wasn't able to be at the Senate hearing today, but I was at the Senate hearing last week before Senator Johnson's subcommittee, and the week before that in the Senate Finance Committee, and just want to make it absolutely clear that what we're watching is political theater. It is merely theater, and it is theater for all that are watching that shows that the emperor has no clothes, that the science that's been put forth by the CDC and Dr. Menares and by Dr. Jake Scott, who was basically representing pharma at the Johnson hearing last week, there's just nothing there, and it's showing up the corruption. There's a reason that this has taken so long, and I'm so grateful that Bobby Kennedy is HHS secretary, and he's making things possible in the culture and within the government that have been unthinkable for over 20 years. So I've been focused on vaccines for the last 20 years. And what we're seeing here in terms of progress is really pretty remarkable. So as I say, the emperor has no clothes. This fellow, Dr. Scott, points out last week that he's never even read the 661 studies that were allegedly going to prove that Bobby Kennedy was wrong, that actually there were real placebos used. No, there weren't. And he had to admit in a hearing under oath that he hadn't even read the studies that he was putting forward. It was an incredible moment. I can't begin to tell you, as somebody who's been focused on this for 20 years, how exciting it is that we just learned 2 days ago that Poul Thorsen, the Danish scientist who is working at CDC, has been arrested in Germany and is now subject to extradition. This is the guy who manipulated the data over in Denmark in 2002 and 2003 that allegedly proves that vaccines don't cause autism. And anybody who's looked at these articles that were published can see that they were really fraudulently prepared on so many different metrics. And the idea that this guy may have to come back and actually may be subject to a prosecution. He embezzled $1 million. He's been on the most wanted list for HHS since 2011. That this guy is going to be back and interrogated and may come clean about what he did and with his co-conspirators is absolutely thrilling. I'm also incredibly eager to see what happens tomorrow at the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. The fact that they're taking up hepatitis B vaccine, which is recommended at birth, is an incredible opportunity to do the right thing. I think as Senator Rand Paul did today, it's outrageous to be giving a baby a shot at birth for which it has absolutely no need and frankly virtually no science behind. So we'll see what happens. Another thing for those of us who've been in this fight a long time, seeing that Bobby Kennedy has appointed Drew Downing, an attorney who has worked for 20, 30 years in the injury compensation program and is coming forward with a comprehensive plan on how to actually make that system work. That is just thrilling because that is a system that absolutely has been abysmal for as long as it's existed. I'd love to see it gone. As Mr. Asprey said ahead of me, there should be no liability shields, and this is concomitant with that. But in the meanwhile, I'd like to see people who've been injured actually be treated with decency and with fairness. Bobby Kennedy's getting to the bottom of autism causation. Anybody who's looked at this knows that it's a huge percentage, well over half, that is regressive and is being caused by environmental factors, and the leading factors likely to be vaccines. It's very exciting that that is going to be dealt with this month. So for those of us who care about these issues, especially vaccines, especially children's health, I strongly advise us to be showing our support for Secretary Kennedy. Write to your senators, write to your Congress people, get involved with Children's Health Defense, get up to speed so that you have information to give. And I'm excited that my colleague Michael Caine will be talking about rallies that we're going to be having in 10 cities to thank Bobby Kennedy for what he's doing. So pay attention to Michael Caine. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks so much, Mary. Yeah, and I don't think the government should ever be in the business of shielding big corporations from liability. If you create a product, you want to make billions of dollars off it, that's great. But you should also be willing and able to get behind your product, to defend that product, and the free market will then take care of it. So if you produce a product that harms people, that creates brain damage or ADD or ADHD or neurological damage or any of dozens of other things, you should have to pay for that, and that's the best way to keep these companies honest. So I think that it's not about what the form of the delivery mechanism is, whether it's food, vaccines, drugs, pesticides. These are toxins that are going into your body. It doesn't matter how they get there, and the companies that make them should be responsible for them. So the next person we have on is somebody who is known as the ultimate human, and is doing just such an incredible job fighting for MAHA principles and coming on this show week after week, even when you're 5,000 miles from us. So very grateful to have Gary Brecka.
Thank you so much. I had a slide that I wanted to put up here. I don't know if you guys had it. There's going to be a quiz on this at the end of my talk, so everybody pay close attention. I use this slide sometimes during stage talks and podcasts and lectures. And the reason why I show you this chart is this complexity that you're seeing right here is what's going on inside of 300 billion cells in your body every minute, every second, every hour of the day. 300 billion cells that were with you yesterday will not be with you tomorrow, because that's roughly the cellular turnover in the body, 32 trillion cells. We turn over about 300 billion of these cells every single day. The reason why I show you this chart, and this is a methylation pathway chart, it's essentially how the body takes all of the raw material that enters our body, every vitamin, every mineral, every amino acid, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, any nutrient of any kind, and converts it into the usable form. And again, what's fascinating about this chart, you can take it down now. I just wanted to show the complexity of it for a moment. What's fascinating about that chart is if I blew it up large enough, nearly every person on this call would recognize the names of everything in the cycle of that chart. What you don't see on there are any chemicals, any synthetics, or any pharmaceuticals. And what's happened to us over the last half century is because of the depletion of our soil, the minerals and the nutrients and the microbiome of our soil and the animals that eat that soil and the plants that grow in that soil, we have become nutrient deficient as a species. And when the human beings become nutrient deficient, it's no different than a plant becoming nutrient deficient. If you had, a leaf rotting in a palm tree, and you called a true arborist, a true botanist out to your house, they wouldn't even touch the leaf, right? They would core test the soil, and they would say, you know what? There's no nitrogen in this soil, and they would add nitrogen to the soil, and the leaf would heal. Human beings, I promise you, are no different. We've been lied to about genetically inherited disease. It's very difficult for the human genome to actually pass disease from one generation to another. We have a propensity for there are some genes that determine a predisposition for disease, but very rarely are we passing things like cardiovascular disease or hypertension or hypothyroid or type 2 diabetes. Things that run in families are familial. They are not genetically inherited diseases, but when people believe that they have a genetically inherited disease, they subscribe to a lifetime of medication. What I'm really fascinated about, one of the sayings I say all the time is more of what God gave us, less of what man makes us. If you were to go into that chart and you were to just pull out the methylation cycle of serotonin, for example, the main driver of mood, and for decades we hung on this serotonin hypothesis of depression. Depression was an inadequate supply of serotonin. We never had a pharmaceutical that raised serotonin. We only had SSRIs that rationed serotonin. We hung on this pharmaceutical bias towards hypertension and hypothyroid because these diseases run in families. But you can actually go into that chart and you can map nearly every form of mental illness. You can map the production of serotonin, the main driver of mood and the main driver of emotion. You can map the deficiency or the lack thereof of dopamine, which is the main driver of addiction. When we were in the research, when I was doing mortality research for 22 years, we had a saying that the absence of dopamine was the presence of addiction. And yet we just trade one addictive tendency for another. The reason why most addiction has a tendency to shift and never really go away is because we actually don't cater to the cellular biology. We don't fix the dopamine deficiency. Addicts don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to get really banged up. They wake up in the morning and say, I want to feel normal. And this search for normalcy generally leads them to an addiction. And the majority of these folks are running from a low. They're actually running towards a high. I am so honored to be a part of this MAHA movement, because when we start talking about getting back to soil health, realizing that there are more microorganisms in a tablespoon of soil than there are human beings on the surface of the earth, you start to understand how diverse and important this is to the survival of humanity, and how important it is to nutrify our biome. You know, what I found in looking at over 200,000 patients, I don't have patients, I'm not a physician, I'm a human biologist, but we have qualified physicians in our functional medicine clinic. Looking at over 200,000 patients, rarely did we find chronic disease or pathology that could not be mapped to deficiency. And understanding that food is medicine, connection is medicine, nature is medicine. You know, these are the hallmark principles that MAHA is standing upon. And obviously, we need to get the corruption out of our nutritional research and the corruption out of our food supply. Having 74% of our nutritional research funded by big food and big pharma, I don't know how anyone on either side of the aisle can think that that's going to develop a normal food pyramid. But I want to give some encouragement, you know, and I want to educate the world that we are not as sick or as diseased or as pathological as we think we are. Very often we are nutrient. I was going to say, if you want to see magic happen in human beings, you give their body the raw material that it needs to do the job. And, you know, with that, I'll yield my time back. I also just, I hope that all of you are praying for Charlie Kirk's family, his wife and his children. I lost a dear friend that day. And I was on a plane with no Wi-Fi. When I landed, I thought I was looking at an AI fake, and sadly, it turned out to be a very real thing. And whether you agreed with Charlie's political stance or not, Charlie encouraged dialogue. He sat down face to face with the people that had the most opposing viewpoint to his, and wanted a rational conversation. And once we've lost the ability to just have a conversation with each other, this is why we fall into these camps where we treat each other as enemies. And we're all human beings. We're all going to live on this earth. I think the MAHA movement is the greatest thing to ever happen in our adult lifetime. And it's a pleasure to have had you guys share your time with me. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Gary. Yeah, that's a great point. You know, dialogue is very much what science ought to be, you know, and that the people from the mainstream media who are on this call, you know, really ought to think about that they, like I said before, you know, make the claim that we're all anti-science, or that Bobby Kennedy is anti-science. But science is about questioning everything. And if you're not willing to question things, then you are anti-science. So Dr. Eric Berg has done just incredible work for the MAHA movement. And I think he's going to talk about definitions. And that's so important. And that ties into what I just said, that we need to not fall for all the games and all the definitional games that big pharma, big ag, big food play on us. Thanks for coming on, Dr. Eric Berg.
Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate it. I'm going to kind of back up what Callie Means was talking about, because RFK is going to be releasing the actual definition of ultra-processed foods coming up really soon. So I'm excited about that. But there's this ongoing debate on how to prevent chronic disease. What's the best diet for health? What should be the new guidelines on the food pyramid? What foods are truly healthy? Which ones are unsafe? What vaccines are safe? What is unhealthy? So at the core of this problem is actually not what you think. There's something more obvious, more actually hidden, and it's even in plain sight, especially when we're talking about ultra-processed food driving chronic disease, because we really have to pause and just ask ourselves, what do we mean by food? There are actually two definitions of food, unfortunately. There is a legal definition of food, and then there's the actual biological definition of food. I want to just show you this. This will blow you away. In 1938, the legal definition of food was rewritten from the Federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. And this is what food is. You might want to be sitting down. Articles used for food and drink for a man, chewing gum, articles used for components of any such articles, as long as it's labeled and packaged correctly, it's food. what the hell does that mean? It's like they're using food to define food. It's so vague, it's so non-specific. It's ridiculous. But that is the legal loophole that they're using to put out these poisons. If you compare this with what's missing, the biological definition of food, that which sustains life, promotes the repair and growth of tissues, nourishment. So this is how big food has won even before the debate has begun, by corrupting the very definition of the food, because there was a bunch of lobbyists that pushed this through back in 1938. So, it's actually quite brilliant because, and it's not very ethical, but it's very brilliant because they literally built multi-billion-dollar businesses selling us toxic poisons. I'm sorry, food and drug and vaccines that are normalized as safe and effective and even delicious. So you could see the trick. It's an omitted biological purpose that is now, ultra-processed food legally qualifies as food. But if you think about, if someone asked you like if I were to ask you 100% of American diet is legally food, right? And you would say, no, it's not. Well, it actually is. But you cannot create health. You cannot sustain life. You cannot repair the body with ultra-processed food. So the facts are that it doesn't fit the biological definition, but it definitely fits the legal definition. So that's kind of a battle that we're in. We're fighting the downstream arguments and dietary food guidelines, but we have this root basic foundational definition that is misdefined, that we're operating this whole, the school system, the hospitals, the nursing homes, the SNAP program, all is based on this misdefinition. And so it's legal. So we don't really have necessarily a health problem. We have a legal loophole problem. And this is exactly why RFK is the perfect person for the job, because he's an attorney. And this is why RFK is their worst enemy right now. So this foundational misdefinition is camouflage chronic disease, because this leads to, everything in moderation, right? You've heard that, right? It sounds safe, but only if everything is actual food. Or calories in equals calories out. Well, then you're reducing food to fuel, you're ignoring nourishment. Or a calorie is a calorie, equating sugar water to a steak as if they were equal. Or my favorite, which is, there's no good or bad foods. There are only good or bad diets. There's no food that's inherently good or bad. That was, I won't even get into the history of that, but that is such a lie. But don't worry, it actually gets worse. Not only have they redefined junk as food, but they actually made healthy food junk. Look what they did, the red meat, cholesterol, saturated fats, salt. So they did a whole inversion on that. Then comes the definition of the word drug. The legal definition is anything intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. So this means that broccoli prevents disease. It's a drug. Now it's regulated by the FDA. If you make that claim, same with turmeric. If it's an anti-inflammatory, it's a drug. It's like a catch-22, like real food becomes regulated under FDA, but it can't benefit anything. Well, junk food gets a pass. Then you get vaccines. The definition of the vaccine has also changed. It used to be a preparation used to stimulate the immune system to produce an immunity. Let me give it to you again. A preparation used to stimulate the immune system to produce immunity to a disease and protect that person from a disease. The new definition is a preparation used to stimulate the body's immune response against diseases. If you notice, they removed this key element to produce immunity. So now you can kind of see why they can say that it's effective, because they're using this misdefinition. And of course, I'm sure I'll ask Tony this, like, Tony, what's a woman? No, I'm not going to go there. But if they change the definition and then they basically win the debate even before it begins. So this is why RFK is such a threat, because he's an attorney and he knows the corruption starts with definitions. And this is why they're attacking him so hardcore, because it hits at the very foundation of the business model. There's Kelly Means talked about that there's going to be a new definition of ultra processed food, and I hope, or I would love to see it be compared and also kind of like restore the actual biological definition and use that for food, so we can then compare ultra processed food. So that way, if it doesn't nourish, then they can't call it a food. That would be awesome. But they would have to do some hardcore studies to prove that. They won't do that because they can't prove it. So, we can just call it edible product, or maybe carry a warning sign like the tobacco industry did, or maybe even regulate it like addictive substances, like they are. So we need to restore the biological definition of food as if it nourishes, it's food. If it doesn't, it's not food. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks so much, Eric. Yeah, it is fascinating how we, how these companies get to play all these games, and there ought to be some kind of false advertising laws in place that make it so that you can't have 20 years where they say doesn't include any sugar, and then now they've changed it around and everything has pure sugar in it and doesn't include one bit of high fructose corn syrup, but then they have 3 other types of things that are actually the same as high fructose corn syrup that just have different names. So, once again, we're all being lied to. We need somebody like Bobby Kennedy, and thank God we have him, who's going to tell us the truth, and who's going to, create health agencies that really are aimed at protecting the American public. So somebody who's a lot less serious and more wise than I am is Russell Brand. Thanks for coming on again. Your comedy, your thoughtfulness, your wisdom really are delivery mechanisms for truth.
Gosh, that's a lovely thing to say. Thank you so much, Tony. It's good, isn't it, that you're in the publishing game and there's so much discussion about language and the definitions of various words. I was reading in Gavin's book, Gavin DeBecker's excellent book, which I guess is behind you there, yeah, Forbidden Facts, about how even the definition of the word autism has become sort of quite mobile and plastic so that less people can be diagnosed with it. And I was fascinated by what Dr. Berg said there about edible products, that we'll sit down for a lovely meal of edible products together because it won't be food anymore. That's absolutely fantastic. And I thought it was great what Gary said, as Gary Brecker, about the soil. I was thinking about humor, and I was thinking about humility, and I was thinking about hummus, and that we have to get down to the soil. We have to get down to who we actually are. If they control language, if they can control language to control reality, that's a very, very essential and molecular form of tyranny that's being asserted there. Reality itself is being maneuvered. Here is, this is from Isaiah 58:8. Then thine health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee. Our health is an indigenous and natural and native state. We are born to be healthy. Health flows forth naturally from us. It takes, in a sense, intervention to make us unhealthy. I was struck by also what Gary said about addiction. I've some experience with addiction. And if you can create a stimulus response where there's no volition, i.e., as is obvious with opioids, and we know how Big Pharma behaved around the subject of opioids. If you can addict people to food, if you can remove volition and choice, well, then you've got a very important and effective product right there if people don't choose whether or not they eat it. And if it makes them sick and vulnerable and malnourished, then in a sense, more's the better. It's probably a fundamental, it's difficult to think of something more fundamental than the addressing the fact that the food that we eat is deliberately toxic in order to make us unhealthy and keep us addicted to it. Wow, man, when you think that our Lord refers to himself as the bread of life, if you have this bread, you won't need other bread. It's nothing short of diabolical, a kind of division and deception that it can't really be separated from evil, from actual true evil. Let me I'm doing that lady there, Mary Holland, who runs the Children's Health Defence. I'm going to be there. I think, as I understand, I don't know if Mary mentioned it. On the conference itself takes place between the 7th and 9th of November. I'll be appearing there, and I'm very grateful to be able to participate in that. It seems in the immediate aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death, the usual things are happening. People maneuvering his corpse around on the chessboard of social media in order to have it represent and leverage different ideas, the same way as you can change the definition of vaccine, or you can change the definition of food, or change the definition of soil, or change the definition of poison, or change the definition of myocarditis. You can change the meaning of someone's death. And I said at the event the other day that if we can't find unity around looking after our children, if we can't find a way of not sort of delighting in toxicity and invective. I mean, how many people are in this chat now? Like a few hundred of us. There's got to be some kind of unity here. There's got to be some sort of faith and goodwill here. What do you think, Mabes? What do you think, my beautiful daughter, my golden firstborn? Who's that baby? We can't agree on the nutrition of our children, if we can't agree on the defense of our children, if we can't celebrate and support a unified voice, like if we can't be unified behind the voice of Secretary Kennedy, I can't imagine what hope there is for us. But I do know that there's hope. Tony, thanks for doing this. Thanks for getting Dr. Berg on there to explain how language and philology are being manipulated and abused. Thanks for getting Gary Brecker on to explain about how addiction is being used. Thanks for getting Callie Means on. Thanks for bringing together all of these important voices. I'm really grateful to be a participant. And hey, who I loved meeting at that event was those women from Mississippi who, like, I think what was the name of that lady? Claire, who made a documentary about her mother. Excuse me, I'm just having a look now because I've changed numbers with her. Her mother, I think, was called, her name was something like, sounded like militia. Like it sounded like someone who was about to get armed in order to fight the good fight. But what was her mother's name? Her mother's name, yeah, it was militia. Yeah, these are some of the mothers that were active for getting vaccines. For getting I'm just sorry. Forgive me if I sound like I'm being disrupted, because I am. There's someone tapping my leg the whole time that I'm doing this. One of the women that advocated for the right to be exempted from vaccines in Mississippi, and I understand they were successful in doing it. What I got when I was there the other night, actually, Tony, was a sense of the people that have been supporting Bobby Kennedy for a long time. And while there might be sort of dormant and difficult periods, we're in one now for sure. Yeah, I think it's really important to remain devout and patient in these moments, because I think this is going to be successful. It'll be really, really difficult, but I think that ultimately we'll succeed, because truth, ultimately, foundational as it is, becomes evident. You can obfuscate it, conceal it, dilute it, and distract people from it. But in the end, there it is, as Churchill said. Thanks, Tony. Good to see all of you. Take care.
Thanks so much, Russell. Yeah, I mean, I think that we all have to agree that we need to protect our children, and that there's been this multi-year war on children in this country, and it stops now, and we're not willing to take that anymore. We're not willing to accept that. And someone who's been fighting really hard, who's been on Joe Rogan, I think, what is it, 5 times, Brigham? Something like that. Has been talking a lot about chronic disease, about big pharma, corruption, the need for functional medicine, the need to look at things out of the box, and then looking at a place like the CDC that has been just totally stagnant, that is totally outdated, that has corrupt people working there, that is just this cesspool of corruption. So Brigham, thanks so much for talking about all these things on Joe Rogan and on so many other shows and bringing it to the public. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Tony. I think in medicine, one of the big things we talk about, and Gary touched on it, is uncovering the root cause of chronic disease. And, I always say, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. when we build an entire healthcare system based on producing, selling, manufacturing, and profiteering off of chronic disease, we shouldn't be surprised when chronic disease is at an all-time high, and so are profits, right? Business is good right now. And throughout our healthcare system, I said this at the federal level, at the state level, you know, our healthcare system, I've historically said, is captured. It's captured, and it's broken. It's not broken. It's rigged. And we're the ones fitting the bill, and we're fitting the bill and loved ones and lost friends and family members. And it wasn't just captured, it was born in captivity. And that's one of the things I've tried to ring the bell on. Every single governmental alphabet organization, if you're a media person and you think that Secretary Kennedy is wrong on this topic, just take yourself down a little walk of history lane. The CDC, you know, in its history of bringing DDT into America and dousing neighborhoods in DDT and all of the issues, the first decision they made was partnering with Monsanto to, they still occupy a building gifted to them by Coca-Cola, right? What level of collusion and capture is that when one of our major regulatory organizations lives and is occupied in a building gifted by Coca-Cola? Then you go to the history of the FDA and its regulatory oversight. The first thing that happened is it's like what we're living today, trying to testify on these food bills. And I saw firsthand how big chemical, big ag, and big food assemble mega lobbies and will come in and try to skew the data, skew the facts, and trick the average American. And the truth of the matter is they've been doing this since the dawn of time. In 1906, Coca-Cola was lobbying not have to disclose that cocaine was in Coke. They were trying not to have to disclose that THC was put into toothpaste. You know, all sorts of lobby has been going on since the dawn of time. And we now have gotten to a point where these big pharmaceutical conglomerates have the ear of the FDA and have the ear of so many of these organizations that the decisions being made are often made in the best interest of industry, not in the best interest of the American people. And one of the things I can say that I have had firsthand witness to and cannot thank Secretary Kennedy enough for is his battle against Big Pharma in the battle to essentially shut down care. One of the things Dr. Oz is talking about is how to drive down the cost of Medicare and some of our governmental payer programs. You can't do that if you eliminate cost-effective alternatives in the marketplace and competitive pricing. So compounding pharmacies are the only time in the last 30 years that industry has conceded on price or given any sort of price concession to the American people. And one of the things that these big pharmaceutical institutions are attempting to do, and I've been ringing the bell on this, is lobby the FDA very hard to reclassify compounding pharmacies and what is deemed a drug versus a biologic. And I just broke this down on Joe Rogan. I'll make it quick. But if industry gets what it wants, it will attempt to reclassify 200 blockbuster drugs as biologics. Why would industry want to change something from a drug to a biologic? Well, it's threefold. One, you go from a 5-year patent to a 12-year patent and monopoly on that drug. Two, you shut down the ability to compound a price-effective alternative for the public, forcing them to come back to you and your stronghold. And then third, they're playing 3D chess. I'm sorry, but this America's favorite nation pricing contract that Trump is working on is very admirable, and I really hope we get it done. But the challenge is industry is always ahead of government, and they have better attorneys, smarter people in place that are going to navigate and change the rules and move the goalpost. Eli Lilly's own CEO is raising prices in Europe. So even in that contract, the drugs that would fall under the contract are going to be comparative to nations like Europe. So how do they change the rules? They raise the price, meaning that America won't get the price concession that Trump and so many people are fighting for. And so I say all this to say, I rung the bell to Secretary Kennedy. He's set up meetings with the FDA. I've had the privilege and the opportunity to sit down with some of the best and brightest at the FDA. and try to stop some of these things from happening. And if it wasn't for the leadership of Secretary Kennedy, this stuff would be unknown. This would just be business as usual, rubber stamp, and America loses and industry wins. But I am very optimistic because of his voice in this administration that we're going to be able to stop these catastrophic things from happening that so many people don't have line of sight into. So much of this is happening in the shadows. And so much of it is happening through processes that allow people to hide their insubordination to the American people's vote, which was a vote for change and a vote for fair pricing on prescription drugs and medications. And if we really want to get proactive, predictive, and preventative and drive down the cost of healthcare, we're not going to do it by allowing industry to shut down telemedicine. Because these big pharmaceutical conglomerates like Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are now suing all of these telemedicine companies, claiming that they're violating the corporate practice of medicine. You know, in my company, I mean, I employ 500 clinicians. I was in an argument with a clinician online. He's like, the problem with the MAHA movement is there's no doctors. And that's where I'm so happy to see Dr. Malone on this call, Dr. Berg. My rebuttal to that was, I am not a clinician, a lot like Gary. I'm not a clinician, but I do employ 500 hardworking Americans, from pharmacists to PhDs, PharmDs, chemists, and MDs, nurse practitioners. We are the frontline defense. We are the ones in the trenches uncovering the root causes of the chronic disease, because this system has failed them. And this system has failed them because there's a lot more money to be made off of selling and peddling drugs than preventing root causes. And that is why the average American is on 4 or more prescription drugs. Our pharmacy benefit managers and insurers are making record profits, but deaths of despair, depression, anxiety, you name it, are at an all-time high. 1.7 million Americans dying every year of chronic disease. And I'm very optimistic with this team and this group and some innovative thoughts that we can't challenge the status quo. And it starts with asking questions. So that's it for me. Thank you, Tony, for the opportunity to talk, and thank everyone for being on this call and listening.
Brigham, thanks so much for all of that. Thanks for being such an incredible fighter for the kind of health justice that this country needs. I mean, it's, you know, you have really been at the forefront of it. Compounding pharmacies are so important because they're just really pushing back on the one size fits all kind of mentality of medicine, which is, we all know that that's just about making as much money as you can, not about really caring whether people get what they need. So it's just so important. And then, you know, going back to what Dr. Berg said before, you know, we can't define what a drug is, what a biologic is, what food is, what a vaccine is. And that's not by accident. You know, that's because these companies are trying to squeeze us as much as they can with their lawyers, with their propaganda, with their PR people, with their control of the media. So, you know, we're all here to make that end now. And Bobby Kennedy can't do it alone. He needs us. He needs us to be out there fighting. So thanks for all the work you've been doing. And next up, we have Michael Caine. He's an activist. He's a fighter in the streets and has done a great job for many, many years. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, Tony. Everybody, I think, knows Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is under attack. What we just saw happen in the Senate with Menarez, who was fired as head of the CDC, is just one example of how big pharma and their lackeys and the media are coming in on Bobby and trying to take him down. That's why we as a movement and as people need to show our appreciation for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and say, thank you, RFK. We are having rallies all across the country on September 27th. We already have nearly a dozen cities, New York, California, Florida, Nebraska, Michigan, North Dakota. We just got word Connecticut and Colorado and Chicago are on board as well too. Where is your city? Where is your state? Florida is having multiple actions throughout their state on the 27th to say thank you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for sticking up for the health of Americans, for sticking up for the health of our kids, and for taking on this fight that nobody else in America was really positioned to take on this fight in the leadership role, quite like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was. We haven't called on people to come out for Bobby in a long time. It was back on confirmation in January. You know, Tony helped me and John Gilmore get a bus. We brought over 100 New Yorkers down, hundreds, maybe thousands of people flooded DC for Bobby for that confirmation. And now is the time that they need to see us come out. So go to children'shd.org/thank you RFK. I'm also going to put in the chat here a tweet that links to it. I just put that to everybody who is on the call right now to check it out. children'shd.org/thank you RFK. We have resources there. Contact us if you're going to hold a rally so we could connect you with people. It's so important we come out and say thank you to Bobby Kennedy now. He needs us now. He needs that support. And thank you to President Trump, who is standing with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We could not do it without the firm leadership of President Trump as well. Thank you, Tony, so much.
Thanks, Michael. Next up, we have Dr. Robert Malone, who's done incredible work. When he first went on to Joe Rogan, it got, I think, more views than Joe Rogan's ever gotten. It was something like 50 million. Is that right, Robert? Something around that.
Joe doesn't keep the numbers, or at least he doesn't share them with me. But I think the first one that really blew that out of the water was when RFK went on Joe Rogan, and that really changed things. And then, of course, President Trump went on.
Yeah, well, you have just been doing incredible work. You've been, side by side, shoulder to shoulder with all of us fighting this, backing Bobby Kennedy on all kinds of different platforms. Really grateful to, for all that you've done, and thrilled to have you as the last speaker for the night.
Okay, that means I'm between you and dinner. So
That's right.
I'll try to be brief. The next 2 days, I'm here in Atlanta, and I get to meet some of the new members that Bobby's appointed for the ACIP. That's for those that are not tuned into the latest nuance. That's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And we're really at the tip of the spear for the efforts to bring reason and data-based analysis, objective data-based analysis, to this category of drugs. That's what vaccines are. They're drugs. And like all drugs, they have benefits and they have risks. And like with all drugs, the question is whether or not the benefits are outweighing the risks, stratified by age and category. So not lumping all of us together as if we're all the same thing, as if we're little machines, but rather the system treating us as, hopefully, as individuals, but unfortunately in the context of public health, the best we seem to be able to get to is having the system treat us as members of a category. So the next 2 days, ACIP is going to be taking on some key issues. One is whether or not the historic MMR-V vaccine product that dates back to the early 60s and the work of Maurice Hilleman at Merck really makes sense in the way that it's being used right now. Now, I'm going to have to recuse myself from that because once upon a time, and the press has weaponized this, of course, I wrote an expert witness report in the case of Kraling versus Merck that really opened up in a major way, I think, for many people, a lens into what really goes on in the vaccine industry and the various types of games that are played with data and information. But because of that, I had to sign an agreement because I was allowed to see all kinds of internal Merck corporate documents obtained during discovery. I had to sign an agreement that I would not ever work on MMR or MMR research. So I'm going to have to recuse myself from that one. The hepatitis B discussion is huge. And I'm so grateful for Rand Paul for his clarity and for his willingness to speak truth. Dr. Paul has often been a little wary as a physician of going against the narrative as it relates to vaccines. But in the case of hepatitis B today, he came out with clear, unambiguous statements in his questioning of the former director of CDC, Susan Menarez. I think that what Dr. Paul has said represents the position that many in the United States, if not the vast majority of parents and Americans that have looked at the rationale of dosing newborns with hepatitis B vaccine, because largely they believe that they can't get access to them later on when they're young adults, and if they fall within the risk groups for hepatitis B, that being essentially intravenous drug abusers and highly promiscuous individuals, so with various types of predilections. So the logic of hepatitis B vaccination for all newborns is very, very hard to defend, but I can tell you that the CDC will attempt to defend that tomorrow. And I've seen the slides. I'm not allowed to speak out of turn until the information is presented, but I think you're going to see a great illustration of the tension that we have here in this space of this area of drugs and drug recommendations, which has become wrapped up in a type of a cult, in my opinion. There is a strangely cultish aspect to the belief that all vaccines are safe and effective. And I see this come out in all kinds of communications, of course, and has been mentioned, we have corporate media here on hand. And for those of you that are members of that esteemed group, I'd like to speak to you directly about a couple of things. Safe and effective are subjective. I'm going to get a little wonky on you. That's not science. That's opinion and feelings. If we want to evaluate objectively whether or not a medical product or a medical procedure is useful, it's not really appropriate to bundle them into these kind of subjective comments of safe and effective, which are functionally propaganda. If we want to communicate to patients, to parents, about the risks and benefits of a product, we need to do so objectively, not subjectively with this kind of propaganda language. We need to give them the facts. What are the risks associated with the disease, for instance, that is being ostensibly prevented by the intervention? What are the risks associated with the intervention? Do those risks include death? What are the rare risks? I can tell you that as a clinical researcher, whenever anybody on any clinical trial I've been involved in enters the trial, they have to have a formal interaction in which they are provided with a very comprehensive list of potential harms that they may encounter associated with whatever it is that's being tested in that clinical trial. And if a very rare harm happens to be death, that gets disclosed. If a very rare harm happens to be neuropsychiatric damage, that has to be disclosed. This whole discussion that we've heard, particularly in the case of COVID, where the assertion is, well, those adverse events are extremely rare, and many of them are extremely rare. Those that have tried to say that everybody that takes the vaccine is going to die, well, in a sense, that's a true statement. We are all going to die, but we aren't necessarily going to die of this product. But there are deaths. There are severe hospitalizations. There are chronic diseases that are associated with receipt of this product. It's not everybody. It's relatively rare. But the thing is that the data are quite clear currently that the risks you have from COVID and the risks your children in particular have from COVID are also extremely rare. So how are you going to assess this when you hear that, oh, those risks are extremely rare, this vaccine is safe and effective? No, what you have to do is you have to take a ratio. What's the risk associated with the disease? And what's the risk associated with the product? And does it make sense to give healthy people that product, given the risk that they might develop some disease that they wouldn't otherwise if you hadn't given it? Well, when you run the numbers, and I posted today, I think it was, or last night on X, some of the data, the number needed to treat to prevent a severe hospitalization that's now published by the British healthcare system. For some reason, the FDA and the CDC are unable to provide the number needed to treat. They're not able to provide the data on the true risk associated with the disease, SARS-CoV-2 infection and COVID. They're not able to provide the number needed to treat with a vaccine to prevent severe hospitalization or to prevent death. But the Brits did it. And when you look at those numbers, they are enormous. You have to vaccinate over 5,000 healthy young people in order to prevent one severe hospitalization. But when you look at the risk of myocarditis, it is far greater than the risk of severe hospitalization. So that's not safe and effective. The last thing I'd like to say, because I don't want to take up too much time, because here we are at the end, is this narrative that keeps getting reinforced by our friends in the media and those, for instance, that were testifying today about science, that Bobby is politicizing the science, that you are damaging the science. Maha is ignoring the science. Maha is causing damage to the science. Okay, science is a verb, guys. It's not a noun. It's not a thing. Science is a process, and it's a process of constant revisiting and questioning the findings of others, the conclusions of others, the conclusions of our public health, quote, experts. That is what science is. Questioning these things, as we are doing on the ACIP, as hopefully you will see over the next 2 days. We're taking our job seriously. We're asking the hard questions. We're actually looking at the data to the extent that we can extract it, real data from the CDC and the FDA. And unfortunately, we're having to go international in order to get those data, because they are available, for instance, in a lot of the Scandinavian countries and in the UK. They're just not available here in the United States. And as Bobby said under testimony a couple of weeks ago, he doesn't know how many people actually died here in the United States. The claims are that we had one of the worst outcomes worldwide in COVID, despite all the assertions that we have this great healthcare system and the CDC did such a rip-roaring good job. But if you look at the data from all over the world, things don't look quite as clear as is being asserted in the media. And for sure, this whole narrative that Bobby or Maha or the likes of us are damaging the science and are destroying public confidence in health, no, that is absurd. We're doing actual science, looking at the data, making objective analyses of risk and benefit, and, by the way, advising. The ACIP does not set policy, and this is a core principle. The appointed people that represent President Trump are the ones that set policy. The director of the CDC serves at the pleasure of the president. Despite what Susan Menarez seems to think, and so does the secretary. They all act at the behest of the president, and the ACIP does not set vaccine policy. What the ACIP does is it provides an independent advisory to the director of the CDC for what we believe policy should be. And one of the key things that we believe should be central in vaccine policy going forward, and we're advising to this effect, is that there needs to be true informed consent, not this sham consent of vaccine information sheets. And here's where you all can really make a difference. The truth is, the federal government does not have the right to regulate the practice of medicine. The CDC does not have the right to establish standard of care for vaccine use. That's the power of the states. The states regulate the practice of medicine. And what's happened is the states have abdicated their responsibility for ensuring that patients have informed consent around vaccines. And it's all been done in the name of protection against liability and convenience. And my gentle request of all of you is to act at your local level and to get loud. People have the right to true informed consent for medicines and medical procedures. This is fundamental in medical ethics. And it's up to the states to put the legislation in place. At the ACIP, we're going to make recommendations for the information that patients should be provided with. We we'll see, be able to make suggestions for how informed consent might be improved. But in the end, it's up to the states, and it means that it's up to y'all to take action to try to advance legislation to ensure that patients are provided the right to an informed decision, not subjected to mandates. I'll leave it at that. Thanks for your listening time and your support and all your kind hearts and thumbs ups. But please help support Bobby and help support all of us. I think what may happen over the next couple of days may trigger a whole lot of anger. And we're going to need you backing us up. Thanks for your time.
Hey, so it's getting late, but just want to say a few more quick things. So one thing is that one way you can really back Secretary Kennedy is to send a message to your senator, to your congressman, that you believe that Bobby Kennedy is trying hard to restore public trust in our health agencies. You support him, you want them to, and you're not going to vote for them if they don't do it. One of the other things is that we should really look at the fact that that this is going to be a tough time for companies that have been poisoning the American public, but it's also going to be a great time, a great opportunity for companies that want to innovate, that want to shake up the status quo and really improve public health. And what you see is that there are consequences. You know, Poul Thorsen is one of the key people who did many of the vaccine studies for the CDC, and he's been arrested for theft. So they're going after the people who've been lying to you, who've been corrupt, who've been poisoning you. And so this is a great moment. This is a time when we can actually win. We can actually push back really hard. So, you know, I would love it if everybody recognizes that we are winning and we have to keep on winning. And this is an existential moment for that. One last thing is that I would like you to follow the MAHA report on Substack. And then just to keep in mind that this meeting is every Wednesday at 4 o'clock. We're going to have great people on every single week. We're very grateful for the help that you're giving us, for your time. And we're going to send you an email after each of these shows that gives you assets that you can repost, and we want you to repost them as widely as you possibly can, because this is our power to get directly to the American people. Thanks so much and have a great night.
We will not comply with the institutions, sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution. We will not comply with the institutions, sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution.
The only thing that will save our country is if we choose to love our kids more than we hate each other.